And Marxism says that when communism will be implemented, it's going to break through the system and there will be equality. There will be no one who's going to be rich, nobody's going to be poor, and everybody will be on an equal footing. So that's what Marxism is trying to achieve through the communist government.
Right.
So as far as the violence is concerned, of course, that's true. That Marx may not have mentioned about using violent means to implement communism. That's a different story. He may or may not have he may not have spoken about them. But if you look at the way communism has come up in most countries in the world, be it Soviet Union, be it Cambodia, even be it Cuba, in all the countries we have seen that communism has come through very violent means. So from that perspective, and the most important point is that the aims that they wanted to achieve didn't work out. I mean, you don't find any society in which there is equality or
Truly
which is classless society.
Right.
So from that perspective, we can say that communism was a failure, and whatever Marx predicted was also a failure, because Marx basically had said that he felt that the first country which would fall in the communist camp is going to be United Kingdom, England, because there was so much of workers' exploitation over there, so many industries, and people in the UK were very enthusiastic about communism, about Karl Marx and so on. So he was under the impression that among the first countries which will fall in the communist camp will be England, and he felt that Russia would be among the last countries, but it didn't work out that way. In fact, the first country to become communist was Russia, and UK never became communist.
The idea of Marxism when they talk about equality is basically flawed, is what I think, is because no two people are same in their efforts to live life. Then how can they have the same amount of resources to live?
Not even twins. Even twins born in the same family can have completely different characteristics, can be completely different. So that's why the Marxist theory, it may have looked like being very attractive.
Ideal society.
And of course, we know that in those days, because the thing with Marxism was that it came upon at a time when, after the French Renaissance, when people began to feel and began to see that there had been so much exploitation by the kings, by the church, and by the nobles. So there were a lot of philosophers who came, who felt that there should be equality and people should not fall back to religion or fall back to the way that kings are ruling the country. So Karl Marx came at a time when there was so much of churning of thoughts, what should be done, what should not be done. And for example, in the case of Karl Marx, he considered religion to be the opium of society, because that again has got a historical background to it, because as far as Europe was concerned, the church was the one who actually ran the administration. They were the ones who were controlling the kings also. The kings in those days, they couldn't do anything without asking permission from the Vatican or from the different kinds of churches. Even in England, the Church of England was a very powerful institution. And he thought that the people who were in power, be it the rich people, be it the clergy, they were all exploiting the poor people in name of religion, in name of whatever. So he considered religion to be the opium of society. And he also felt that, the only way that this can be, he was basically against, from his understanding of religion, he was completely against that concept. That's why he was very much atheistic in that respect.
So basically against organized religion, that whichever interface to the state affairs.
Yeah, so actually Karl Marx began with that, that theory, because his understanding of religion was concerning the Abrahamic religions, and he was against that. But having said that, if we look at it in the Indian context, for example, so, Karl Marx also spoke a lot of very crazy things about India, and very, very, he was very much anti-Indian. He spoke a lot a lot against Hinduism also. He made many comments against India. He made many comments against Hinduism.
Oh, I didn't know.
So for him, the ancient world was not a very glorious place to be. In fact, he said that the ancient world they knew nothing. They were very uncivilized people. So he considered the medieval period as one stage ahead. Because the problem with the thing with Karl Marx was that he interpreted history in a materialistic form. He considered that history is just a struggle between those who are exploiting and those who are being exploited. For him, history was just a continuous struggle which was going on right from the ancient times up to now. And the present time when he came in the 19th century was the time when people were getting more and more aware of what they were and so on. But the ancient world, people didn't know much. So that's why he considered the ancient world to be a very miserable place to be.
Possibly true in case of Western society, but
yeah, exactly.
So why is this hatred of communist people for Hinduism coming from? Is it because Karl Marx hated religion per se,
Yeah,
and
so
they're
I think
interpreting Hinduism as a religion?
The problem with the communists in India, and for that matter all across the world, for all the claims that they made that they don't believe in religion, they don't believe in, believing in something, they actually have come to consider Karl Marx as some kind of god. So whatever Karl Marx said, it has to be followed blindly. That's how it works. Of course, in certain cases, people at certain point of time were giving the same kind of status to Stalin or to Chairman Mao or to Pol Pot. But Karl Marx was probably the godfather of all of them. So that's why they considered whatever Karl Marx said to be the gospel truth. So when Karl Marx said that the ancient world was a miserable place, especially he spoke a lot about India. So he mentioned about India that, for example, he says, I share not the opinion of those who believe in a golden age of Hindustan. Indian society has no history at all. What we call as Indian history is actually the history of successive intruders. So, according to him, Indians had no person of their own. All those people were those who came from outside. So, at that, be it any kind of foreigner. So, the British people were just one among them. So, Indians didn't have any history of their own. So, when the British people, yeah.
Shouldn't he? So, it sounds to me like Marx is being basically supporting the oppressed. British, in that case, would be the oppressors. And Indians are oppressed. So, shouldn't he support India in that sense?
That's what he was saying, that Indians, I'll tell you one more thing about Karl Marx, which many Marxists don't sort of disclose right now. So even though Marx may have criticized the British politicians or the British government or European, forms of government and whatever, at heart he shared many similar views of the colonists. For example, he did believe that the Asians, the Africans were uncivilized people. In many respects, they were savages. They really needed, it was like a white man's burden. He also shared in that belief that they really needed help to be civilized. So in a respect, for example, Karl Marx, he was actually supporting the Opium War, which is very surprising. Many people don't even know about that. Actually, Karl Marx did support Opium War. And in that respect, Karl Marx even felt, for example, Karl Marx said that India did need European or British colonization to save them. That's what Karl Marx said, that it's very important for India to be colonized by the whites because they were giving them the culture. So he says, India could not escape the fate of being conquered. The whole of our past history has been successive conquests. So Indians were supposed to be ruled. And he was very thankful to the British that they came and ruled over them. And the British were actually civilizing them. So that's what he said. So because Karl Marx took history in a very, in a way that,
fashion,
yeah, the ancient world is bad and people were uncivilized. So he completely discounted any kind of achievements that ancient India did. Now, when you look at British historians of that time, they were very, they definitely conceded that Indian culture, like for example the Guptas, the Mauryas, the Guptas, and different empires that came, especially Mauryas and Guptas were considered as the golden age of Indian history, and everything was among the best. It was among the best culture in the world at that time. So the British accepted that, but not Karl Marx. He doesn't accept that point. That's why when you have the Marxist historians who came, who dominate all of institutions, these people just followed Karl Marx lock, stock and barrel. So when British are saying that the Gupta Empire was the golden age of Indian history, they will start to dig into some kind of problems. Oh, it was good, but there was some casteism over there, or so and so people were being oppressed, and blah blah blah, without any kind of evidences. But they have to interject and put some kind of thorns in that narrative that Guptas were the golden age. So that's how they worked. Now Karl Marx is also not just criticism of India. Karl Marx also attacks Hinduism directly. Karl Marx says that the Indians transformed a self-developing social state into a never-changing natural destiny. They fell down to the level that they adored Hanuman, the monkey god, and Sabala, the cow. I don't know what is Sabala, but maybe could be that something similar.
This is his quote.
Yeah. So he says he was basically antagonistic towards Hinduism also. He said they were just praying, just worshipping trees and nature. They didn't have any concepts. Now one may say that did Karl Marx also attack or did communists, let's say for example communists in Egypt or communists in Greece, did they also attack the ancient Greek and Egyptian cultures? We don't know, but maybe they didn't. It's not important because Greece had become Christian by then and Egyptians had become Muslim by then, right? So they were not encountering any kind of native Egyptian or Greek practitioners. They're all converted to Abrahamic faiths. So according to Karl Marx, as compared to Hinduism, the Abrahamic faiths were better because at least they had a concept of organization. They were organized. They had at least some message to give to society. So according to him, they were on a better pedestal as compared to Hinduism. And that's the reason why we look at our Marxist historians, because the medieval period has to be better than the ancient period. So by default, when the Muslims came to India, when the Mughals came to India, it's just not possible that they were they were bad. And if there were some persecutions that they saw being committed on Hindus, it must have been the Hindus' fault because they were so caste driven. They didn't pay attention to Dalits. They didn't pay attention to untouchables or whatever. And the Muslims came to civilize them because the medieval period has to be better than the ancient period. So that's the reason why, according to Marx and according to Marxist historians, the ancient period was completely superstition. So that's the reason why we see that they don't have any kind of they don't give any kind of credit to them.
And one more thing that I recall from here is as you mentioned about Marx saying opium is the religion of masses.
Opium of masses.
That was relevant for church in Europe, but that was not relevant in India because all the head of states that we had, the Shankracharyas and all, they never interfered in the functioning of state. So this was not relevant for India. And again, later on you mentioned about the historians distorting the facts. So I think this is where the Aryan invasion theories comes into picture, that they were following his footsteps blindly.
Completely true. See, actually Aryan invasion theory came about, was created by the person called as Max Muller. He was the one who started that. So after that, there's been there's been so many evidences to the contrary that Aryan invasion theory couldn't have happened. And of course, then the Marxist historians, went one step, they went one step backward. They accepted, it's not an Aryan invasion theory, it's an Aryan migration theory or whatever. But the fact remains that the entire theory was based on absolutely no grounds. There was absolutely no logic to it. But yes, the Marxist historians, for them, it was a point in which they could say that yes, even if there is something good in this country, it came from the Aryans who actually came from outside. So you people have nothing of your own, because Karl Marx says India has got no history of its own. Whatever has come from the outsiders. So it makes no difference.
So was he completely ignorant about all the texts which we have, like Mahabharata? Not even if he's thinking that it's not real, but the ability of creating such enormous amount of
text,
literature, philosophy, was he completely ignorant about all this?
I think, was he an armchair thinker in that sense?
Probably.
He was an armchair thinker for sure, because he never did anything at all, for sure. But to the point is that, Marx approached history from an economic perspective. He didn't approach history from the way it should be approached. Like when you study any subject, you look at it with an open mind, right? You don't start what you call studying maths from a historical point of view, right?
Yeah.
You study maths with how it should be studied. But Marx was approaching history from a from an economic point of view,
Single lens.
from a materialistic point of view. So for him, it was like, that same kind of system in which he studied. Obviously his study was limited to where he was, maybe Europe or somewhere else here and there. So from what he studied is that ancient world was a very dark age in which people didn't even know what's going on, like, that sort of thing. And as you stepped up the ladder in the medieval times, then things began to improve. And of course, he was trying to connect them with scientific facts, so people in the early ages didn't know much. At least in Europe, it was all darkness, right? And then when you come to the medieval times, and there were some scientific theories that they found out that the earth is not the earth is not flat, and so on. So he was trying to connect them with the kind of progress which was made on the scientific sphere, and according to that, people began to be aware of exactly what was going on. Society began to be more organized, and so on. And in that comes organized religions. Whereas he saw that and probably Karl Marx was just carrying the same kind of the baggage which every European at that time, they had that same kind of thinking that Indians are worshipping trees and nature, all that stuff. He probably didn't have he didn't probably study any of these books. And missionary influenced propaganda in those days. There was one side in the 18th century which was very much influenced and very much appreciative of Indian culture. But that was only for some time. When the missionaries came to India big time, they began to cast aspersions on every single thing which was Hindu. They began to say that Indians kill their women, Indians they abuse the lower castes, and they worship trees, they worship snakes, and there are a group of thugs who kill people and they offer them before Durga, and so on. So that kind of background was very prevalent when Karl Marx came in the scene. So probably he carried with him all of those thoughts, and he didn't take the time to study anything else. So my point is that we may or may not blame Karl Marx for that, because he was not the only one carrying that kind of thought process. The problem is with the Marxists, his followers, right, who supposedly are very rational, they always are very scientific bent of mind and so on, yet they tend to accept whatever Karl Marx says as some kind of gospel truth. It cannot be changed. In many respects, they have made Marxism as kind of a religion like any other one.
True. We're not open to criticizing Marx or Lenin.
And as far as armchair intellectuals are concerned, that is a very common feature, not just in India, but even in Europe. You look at the European left, they are just like that. Armchair intellectuals, always creating a lot of noise, but never ready to do anything. And that's not, it just didn't begin from today. They had in the 1930s, the Soviet Union had recruited some top intellectuals to the Soviet communist cause. They were called as the Cambridge Five. They were basically 5 people, but they recruited many people. And these 5 students from Cambridge belonged to very elitist background, like very rich families, very aristocratic families. They were studying in Cambridge. And they all started working for the Soviets, and they betrayed Britain and even the Allies in the World War II very big time. But when it came to the point of defecting to the USSR, the USSR wanted them to defect, formally in the 50s, 60s, when there was no use for them to stay back in UK. The USSR wanted them to defect, but only one person called as Kim Philby, he was the only one who defected. And another one called as Anthony Blunt, who was so, he was a big betrayer for British interest. He said, no, I can't live in this Soviet lifestyle, forget it, it's horrible. So these people are the ones who are convincing, recruiting people to have that Soviet system, but without being bothered about going themselves. So that's how hollow and hypocritical they are.
Okay. Karl Marx is having that baggage, understandable. But Indians who are actually Hindus, so why are they behaving in such a way? Why do they hate Hinduism? Okay, I understand that they are considering Marx as a god, and okay, everything he says is gospel, basically truth hai. So, but even then, it's like almost betraying their own kind in that sense, where they don't bother to read the real history and just simply follow what Marx said.
So I think that probably you can explain why is it that people in India, the youth of today, why do they get attracted by Marxism? What is your opinion?
Communism is very attractive for you when you have enough food and you don't have much brains. Because because at that time you would want everybody should have equal resources, but it only takes some maturity and sense of life which will make you realize that people actually don't want to work hard everybody don't want to work hard. So they should by default not have all the resources, because that takes away from the person who wants to work hard will have no reason to, if you make sure that he will not get any better rewards for it.
So I think that to the question of what attracts people to Marxism is basically
Especially in
that
India.
idealistic. No, I think it's even other parts of the world, right? So you have the left also, which they may call themselves liberal, but they still have that kind of feeling that Karl Marx was some kind of great philosopher and so on, and they try to try to conceal his so many faults. Like for example, even though Karl Marx was a half Jewish, yet he hated Judaism. He hated the Jewish community. He called them as crass capitalists who are trying to suck people's blood and so on. So if you look at it, most of the leftists and communists, they also hate Israel. Or even the left in Israel, of course, they are a part of the Jewish state, but they will always have extremely liberal views towards the Palestinians and so on. So my point is that Marxism at one point seems very idealistic, that we want to make the entire society equal. Okay, that's what is being sold. Like you tell somebody that there is no one is going to be poor, nobody's going to be rich, everybody will be equal. So from that idealistic or romantic type of approach, it may have a lot of appeal. But finally, I would say that if you're talking about 1930s, 1920s, 1940s, when communism was not much understood, I can still understand that people were, even like Bhagat Singh, for example, he was not a communist as communist people try to claim in India, but for sure he was attracted to a lot to what Karl Marx wrote, and even he was attracted to Lenin's government, because supposedly at that time many intellectuals from England, they visited Russia and they gave a very rosy picture. Oh, here everything is very good. It was all a propaganda type of trip which many English intellectuals did at that time. So Bhagat Singh must have read, and he sort of got of course when Bhagat Singh passed away, it was not much, he didn't see much of Soviet Union. But my point is that this Marxism theory as an ideal in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, it still could make some sense, okay? And in that respect, like my favorite author of fiction espionage, a person called as Eric Ambler, a very good writer, by the way. And his books, he was actually a very great proponent of communism. He supported communism. In his writings, you can find that he always gives a very good image of communist people. But and he was a great crusader against the Nazis and fascist. But in 1939, when Soviet Union and Germany signed the Ribbentrop and Molotov Pact, right, in which they had a non-aggression pact, they joined hands together, the Nazis and communists, his entire hopes completely got tarnished and he became totally against communism. So my point is that you see something, when you read something as an ideal, it looks good, right? But when you have seen that throughout history, all the communist states have done exactly opposite of what they have preached. They've been a complete disaster, and yet you feel that something really is going on good. It's like saying Osama bin Laden writes a poem about love and poetry, love and peace.
Of course,
and
he
you
had
read
so
it.
many wives.
You read about it, and then you say, "Wow, that's very good." But then you have to also study what Osama bin Laden did. His actions, right?
So this is where we can conclude all these interpretations and all. That this is where we say beef eating festivals are progressive, but worshipping cows is
Exactly.
regressive.
I agree with you completely. So beef eating festivals is all coming out from that concept only, that you have to try to break through the shackles of whatever is considered as superstition by them. So because Karl Marx considers ancient customs as superstition, right? So all the Marxists in India will only choose to attack whatever is Hindu. They will not go, they never actually did anything for triple talaq or halala, or even for other Christian, customs and superstitions. They didn't consider that to be as as bad, because Marx says it's ancient world, which translates to Hinduism. So only Hinduism has to be attacked.
Besides the fact that, okay, I do agree that everybody should get equal opportunity, but as far as I can see in the real world, the only countries which are ensuring right to education, Germany, right to food and proper living standards, are the worlds which are all capitalistic in nature. So Europe or Denmark, US for that matter. So is it safe to say that actually the basic rights are safe with capitalistic societies?
So again, you see, you're talking about Denmark. So places like Denmark and many Scandinavian countries, they are actually called as social democrats. So they have this, thinking that, of course, they are democratic by nature. They have elections and everything, but they are very socialist countries in the respect that everyone, gets. Free stuff from the government, right from the cradle to the grave. People are always covered. If you fall sick, or if you have any problem with money or whatever, the government's job is to take care of you. So like a very socialist type of structure.
Same
My
Canada,
point,
right?
yeah, Canada, I'm not sure, but my point here is that from the Indic perspective, neither capitalism, neither socialism, or any of these isms is going to be the perfect thing. You have to drive a balance. You have to draw a balance. Our ancient kings, for example, they never taxed anyone heavily in those days, right? In those days, the kings were very liberal in that respect, and they provided for society. The king's job was to take care of every single person, every single citizen of the kingdom must have food and must be able to live an honorable life. That was the king's responsibility. So we have to, rather than telling what can be the best thing, communism or socialism or capitalism or whatever, it has to be basically logical, which is more important, common sense, which is very important. So of course there has to be democracy for sure, but democracy with some responsibilities, and a structure in which people do not have shortage of land, shortage of housing, and shortage of food. These things have to be taken care. It can be any system, whatever works for that country, that's good enough.
Yeah, that's
and also depends on place to place, right?
Yeah,
You can't copy and paste
so
everywhere.
much because there is no need for me to go and defend capitalism, because that is not us anyways. Right?
Definitely, yeah.
Which is very liberating to know.
Shall we move on to some other topics?
Sure.
But